Sarah, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Part 4 series of the provider training for the HCBS rules. We're calling this particular session the HCBS rules implementation in a COVID-19 world. And the setting that we're focused on today is the DDD employment programs. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We did a session like this yesterday, and this worked really well. So we do have a small brief presentation I'll talk about in just a moment. So we will mute everybody just to make sure that we eliminate any background noise. After the presentation, we'll talk through a series of questions to help facilitate our dialogue today. So if you'd like to participate in the discussion verbally, please raise your hand, and we will go ahead and acknowledge you and unmute you so you can provide your comments or feedback. Also, you can utilize the Q&A option, which is on the bottom middle part of your screen, where we can entertain your questions or comments, and we'll also flip back and forth throughout the session between those who are giving verbal comments and those who are typing their comments. If you happen to see something that somebody else has mentioned that you like, go ahead and do that. There's a little like button that you can press, just like on Facebook, next to their comment. That'll help us prioritize any discussion items. And then certainly if you have an idea that you want to share, please type it in the Q&A. We are utilizing this information to help develop some additional materials for you all, and that just helps us with note-taking as well. So feel free to participate in whatever forum that's comfortable to you, but we're hoping to have some really good dialogue today. Next slide. Our objectives for today. It's been some time since we've been together to talk about the HCBS rules. So we'll do a quick overview of the intent of the rules just to help provide some context for the discussion today, as well as Danielle will talk about the HCBS rules in practice specific to employment programs. Again, to highlight and provide some context, just to give an overview of what are those things that we're looking for providers to implement and comply with in order to comply ultimately with the HCBS rules. Danielle will also go over the quality monitoring assessment and the process. You already get quality monitoring today by DDD. And so we'll just give an overview of what that process will look like and how it will, it'll look differently moving forward with the HCBS rules. So talk a little bit about how it looks differently and how you can provide documentation. The bulk of today's session will really be brainstorming and discussion. We really feel strongly that it's important to engage with your peers in the industry to talk about what are your changing best practices that you've employed or plan on employing that really align with the person-centered practices that are required by the HCBS rules, as well as what challenges are you experiencing. We had some really good dialogue yesterday of both items. What are some innovative things people are doing, and then what are some challenges that people are having and their peers in the industry were able to sort of impart and share from their experience. Next slide. So the intent of the HCBS rules. You all heard this before, but we can't say it enough, I think, because it is a change for all of us, and we're terming it as a cultural shift. And in some cases, for some of us, it's a broader cultural shift, and others it's a little bit more narrow for us. But nevertheless, it's different, and it's a higher standard of quality of care. So the first part of the HCBS rules is to enhance the quality of the home and community-based services, particularly from the member experience perspective. The second intent of the rules is to provide protections to participants. So we look at these rules as rights that each member is afforded certainly with restrictions being applied for health and safety reasons. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The overall goal is to make sure that people have access to the benefits of community living to the same degree that you and I, those of us who don't receive home and community-based services, might have. And we've done a great deal in our program historically throughout the years and even today as a result of much of the work that you all have been doing to support members to receive services in the most integrated setting. So what the HCBS rules does is allows us to take that further. So beyond supporting people in integrated settings, what are we also doing to make sure that they're integrated into their community to the same extent that you or I are integrated? So the culture shift applies to sometimes when people gain greater access to integration, we look at that as something that they have to earn or they have to work towards and attain something. But actually, the HCBS rules is quite opposite, right? Everybody gets the access afforded under the HCBS rules. They don't have to be earned, but certainly there may be necessity to have some of those rights restricted. The key here is that those restrictions are individualized. This is planned for and addressed in the person-centered planning process, or for you all in the DD world, the ISP. But it's a matter of everybody gets it, and then we pull away for those folks temporarily, hopefully, to be able to work on how we can support that individual to get where they need to be so they can have access to all of the rights under the HCBS rules. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Danielle, who's going to give you an overview of the rules in practice as it applies to employment programs.
Thank you, Dara. So we're just going to go through quickly a really high kind of overview about the HCBS rules and what it might look like in practice for employment programs. We do have a lot more detailed training on our website, and we'll give you that information a little bit later. So the HCBS rules afford employment services and supports for our members, which you guys are the experts. So just what this might look like a little bit differently, making sure that you support individuals to have career exploration opportunities, just like really anyone. You know, you don't really know what you can do or would like to do for work if you don't know what's an option or what might be available. So it's just important we let people have that career exploration ability. And then do individuals employed or preparing for employment have job tasks that a non-disabled peer would perform for pay? So just making sure the work that people are doing is actual work that, you know, anyone else could be doing with a similar skill set. Engagement in community life. So for employment, this looks a little different. And it looks really different right now because of COVID. We won't, you know, pretend that it doesn't. But basically, we want to see that when it's safe, working individuals are interacting with members of their community. This could look like, you know, purchasing goods, interacting with customers, people who come in to help train individuals, just things like that that you would see at any normal kind of work environment. Again, when it's safe to do so. Because of the pandemic, you do have that transition plan available to you, so you can let us know if your program is open, the wonderful and amazing things you guys are doing to work around the pandemic to keep people safe, because we know there's good work being done right now. Let's see. We also want to make sure that people are routinely interacting with the general public. So again, this could be someone visiting the program in normal times, or even people in the program going out to maybe sell their goods in the community or provide a service. We've heard of some employment programs that sell products at farmers markets and just cool things like that. So we just want to kind of see something like that, some normal interaction with the community for the work that's being done. Control of personal resources. Just making sure people have someone to assist them in managing their funds if they need that. This may not necessarily fall in the employment program, but as the program, we want to make sure you're supporting people and you're helping them find those resources if they need them. We want to make sure people decide how to spend their money. So, you know, this could just be like in any work environment, I can go to the vending machine and, you know, get a snack if I want one. Just simple things like that. Do individuals have access to the community to purchase goods and services? So if I'm on a break, can I, you know, go to Circle K to get a Coke, you know, as long as there's no health or safety risk, just things like that. Is paperwork rendered directly to the individual or the representative? Obviously, if people are doing work for pay, we want to make sure they're getting paid. And are individuals provided with information about how their benefits are affected by employment income? So I know Access offers DB 101, which is, I believe, an online training course that helps provide information on how benefits could be impacted by employment. So we just, you know, we don't expect you to provide the training, but you could definitely point people to the resource, and we want to make sure that's happening as people need it. Receiving services in the community to the same degree of access as other people. So for employment, this might look like requesting alternate work schedules. You know, whether or not that's doable is a completely separate conversation, but for my job, if I need to maybe, you know, flex a day, I can work that out with my boss. If I need to work, you know, I already kind of work a flex schedule. So I do 8 to 4:30 and I just take a really small lunch. And we've worked that out and that's okay. So just that people can have those conversations as appropriate and kind of figure out, you know, again, whether or not it's doable, completely different, but at least be open to having the conversation. Do employed individuals have benefits to the same extent of individuals not receiving Medicaid? So again, negotiating work schedules, breaks and lunch, if it's possible or applicable, vacation, medical leave, or medical benefits. Just if those options are out there, we want to make sure that our members have those available to them as well. And do individuals have informal support assist them in participating in employment-related activities in the community? So this would be like going out, selling goods at a farmer's market or something. If someone needs assistance, are you making sure or providing support to make sure they can participate? Setting selection probably looks a little different now, but in normal times, are people able to visit the setting prior to choosing to participate in the program? You know, whether that's a tour or participating in an activity or a training, just making sure that what they're going to get is what they actually want to receive from the program. And I think some people are doing this differently through virtual tours, things like that, you know, just trying to work around the COVID safety requirements. Person-centered plan. So we want to see that the setting is providing support so people can participate in their person-centered planning meetings. We'd also like the setting to participate when it's possible. You know, these are very important meetings where people are deciding their goals for the future, and their employment program would be a huge part of helping them obtain those goals in some way. So we want to make sure you're part of the conversation. We also want to make sure you can provide updates on the person's progress or changes that might impact their goals, and that your program plan aligns with the person-centered plan. Privacy, dignity, and respect. These are easy, and I'm sure they're already being done. People will receive personal care assistance in private when they need it. People will receive information about their rights in plain language, and they know who to contact if they have concerns or complaints. And then we want, of course, our members to be protected against restrictive measures, including isolation, chemical and pharmacological and physical restraints. Autonomy and accessibility. So with making decisions, which, about your day, which can be difficult in an employment environment, but it's kind of along the lines of those scheduling changes. Just working together as a team whenever someone has a request to see if it can be fulfilled or not. And then this is a little different than ADA requirements, but we want to make sure that the setting is accessible for people to safely and freely move around. And this really means free of barriers. So, we don't want to see that rooms are locked that should be open and accessible to everyone there. We don't want people locked in any areas, things like that. Individual choice. So if someone does need a staff member to assist them, do they have the option to make a request? For example, I like working with Dara. Can we work it out so eventually I can get on the same schedule as Dara so I can work with her? Again, if it's in the realm of possibility. And then are those requests for alternate staff members honored? Understanding there are staffing constraints and we can't always honor everything, the next day, but can we work towards it? And can individuals freely make those requests in the way that their services and supports are delivered? So all this kind of gets figured out in a provider self-assessment. Your health plan, DDD, will send that to you when they're ready to complete your assessment. And you'll get a bunch of questions like the ones we just went over, and you'll answer how they apply to your setting. And then you'll provide documentation examples that kind of support your responses. And while we'll get a lot of good information from that, it's obviously not a full picture of the great work you're doing. So we'll also, DDD will do some member interviews with people who participate in your program. Not every member, and it might look a little different because of COVID. We're kind of playing around with the idea right now of having like a small member group participate in an interview to give us a better idea of how things go and work at your program. There's also an observation element, which obviously is very different. Normally your health plan would go on site and kind of complete this whole process. That may not happen right now, so they may do like a thing like this, like a webinar where they have video access and you have video access. So they can just kind of get a tour and see specific things that are happening at your setting. There's also a community interview aspect. This isn't just going out and asking random people on the street questions about your setting. This is more if you have people who regularly interact with your setting, so trainers, employers, customers, things like that, then you could give that contact information to DDD, and they might call them up just to see, get their experience and let them brag about the good work that you're doing. So, because we're in the middle of a pandemic, things look a little different. Some MCOs, and I believe DDD in particular, is going to try to do on-site assessments starting in April, I believe. This does depend on how comfortable you are with the on-site assessment. You'll have to be clear that if you want them to do anything specifically, you'll have to outline those requirements. Masks 6 feet apart, and then anything you might have on top of that. Just be sure to have that conversation with them if you do want that on-site interview. And I'm going to throw it back over to Dara.
Sure, thanks, Danielle. When we talk about HCBS rules compliance, one of the things that we really want to stress is that while there are specific standards, there can be definitely very creative and innovative ways that you meet those standards. So we really want to encourage you to be creative with what kinds of practices and things you put in place to support compliance. Even today, when we talk about practices that you all are employing, you may not necessarily think they're innovative, but it's innovative if somebody else hasn't thought about it. And it can be something that supports them. So we certainly, when we get to the discussion period, encourage you to talk about that. Also be creative with documenting or demonstrating how you meet or will meet the standard. Danielle talked about there could be videos, there could be photographs. Obviously, everything needs to be HIPAA compliant, but it could be a policy you have. It could be documentation you have posted at the work site. So really just think creatively again, what it is that you're going to do to comply. And some of that can also be very distinctive depending upon the members that you're serving, or the setting in which you're providing the services. So definitely be creative is the theme. Also, Danielle talked a little bit about the transition public health emergency to talk about certainly things you haven't been able to do, but what are those things that you have done, even with applying some restrictions for health and safety reasons to mitigate risk? What have you done to meet members' needs during the public health emergency? And then how are you going to transition or phase back in, or to transition back into either practices that you had before COVID-19, or even come back stronger with respect to HCBS compliance? So certainly, view that as an opportunity to highlight those things and to plan. So when that time comes, you've got something in place that you can implement. Next slide. So just before we get to the reflection, Diane, I see a question from you about the self-assessment tool. So we are making just some final revisions. So we do plan to get those up on the website very soon, but also you will get them from the health plans when they send out the notice of the assessment, which will be at least 30 days ahead of time. But we are working to get them up as soon as possible. So thank you, Diane, for asking that question. So before we get into the questions and the dialogue today, we've been thinking about a lot of this internally as sort of something that can help us think about what our members might experience as it relates to being in a setting where a provider is providing a service. And this is a little bit more challenging to think about with respect to an employment situation, but a lot of our members have experienced isolation and restrictions before COVID, right? Because of the fact that they receive services, or they might receive services in a particular setting. So we want to try to use maybe what we've all experienced in the last year to help us reflect on how we can put ourselves in the position of members, and really use that as the litmus test for, does this seem like a good strategy for HCBS compliance? So we just sort of had three questions we just kind of want to put in the forefront of your mind. So have you experienced social isolation in the past year as a result of COVID? Well, I can tell you from a work perspective, absolutely. I miss my coworkers. I miss the energy that you get when you sit in a room with people. So there are obviously certain things that have restrictions that were imposed upon us in a work environment, right? Like many of us were told, you've got to work from home. And I'll tell you, that is not my preferable place to work. One, I don't want my home to be my work environment. I don't want them to be one and the same. And then two, I just like to be around people. So, but I honored, obviously, the directive from our director to work from home for those of us that could. And so, but we had a restriction put on us that wasn't necessarily our preference. For some people, that was something they enjoyed, and was actually a benefit. And then because we've all worked remotely, and even like how we're meeting today, we've implemented very creative ways to connect, whether it's in our personal lives or if it's in our professional lives. And we have something with our team at work that we have a weekly water cooler meeting where we spend a half an hour with each other via Zoom or Google, and we just talk about everything but work to connect, because those are kinds of the natural things that would happen during the day in the work environment. So we've all experienced isolation. We've all experienced restrictions imposed upon us that were things that we didn't desire. And then we've all had to develop creative ways to engage. And so that's really sort of somewhat of our lessons that we can take from persevering through the public health emergency to looking at how do our members feel in the settings where we provide services, before COVID, and we'll hopefully not experience these things after, but how can we apply these principles to take a look at what we all want to collectively do to improve the member experience and integration through the new standards of the HCBS rules. Next slide. So now it's your turn to talk. This worked really well yesterday. Like I said, a session that we had yesterday, we really feel strongly again that peer-to-peer discussion is the best way to support everybody to comply. Of course, access and in partnership with our health plans and the workforce development administrators and our Adam Robinson, our employment administrator. I mean, we're going to continue to support you because we feel like this is a team effort. It's a community effort. But we also feel when you get to the part of operationalizing some of these practices, it's a benefit to have peer-to-peer discussions. Today is really just getting the conversation started again. What we want to do is take the themes and the priorities that come out from this discussion to help inform subsequent training around those specific topics or challenges. But today we really just want you to share what have you been doing, what do you plan on doing, or what's challenging that you're just kind of stumped about, so that and getting the feedback and input from others in the provider community. So we're going to start off with one question and then get to a second question, and with the time that we have left. And just want to remind everybody, we are going to monitor the Q&A. So please go ahead and feel free to type in your comments or questions or input into the Q&A, but also we encourage you to raise your hand and we'll call on you to engage in discussion. The last thing I want to say is that this is a no judgment zone. So we really just want to have conversations. So it's a safe place to share your feedback, your ideas, and your challenges. And we're just going to basically facilitate a conversation between you all as providers. We feel you're in the best position to speak to this, even to a better degree than we are. Let's go ahead and to the first question, Danielle. So looking at the HCBS areas of focus, involving members in the community, individualizing member choice, integrating your settings within the community, what practices and activities did you have to curtail or restrict in order to assure member safety, and what innovative practices and activities did you replace them with? So this is really specific to the time period we are in now with the reality of the public health emergency. So what did you do? What did you have to restrict? And what did you do in place of those things to be able to continue to provide services, or at least stay in touch with members, maybe if you had to curtail your services altogether? So we'll just give a minute. It looks like we have a couple of folks that are ready to go.
Yep, if you want to speak over the phone, make sure to raise your hand, and then I will give you the access you need to talk. Just a reminder, you may be double muted, and you probably are. So you have to unmute your computer and your phone if you had called in. So Monica Attridge, I am going to allow you to talk right now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Well, one of our programs here at Hojoni is a fine arts program. It's not a traditional work program, but believe me, the artists work. It's actually a DTA service, but they have not been able to come to the studio and produce art, and so one of the things that we have done is to take art supplies to their homes, and so that they could work on, expressing themselves. And one of the things we're going to do, and this isn't just for Hojoni, it's for any interested providers in Flagstaff, they have all been invited to have to create works that explore how they feel about coming out of the pandemic. And then this will culminate in an exhibit in May at our art gallery. And I think that, not only is it something, better to do than sitting at just sitting at home, but it's also therapeutic. And so we're really looking forward to that, and the art from our artists as well as from artists at other organizations.
Thank you, Monica. That's really cool. I might want to see that art exhibit.
I was just going to say the same thing. Please send us a notice. I think that'd be fun. Great, thank you. That's wonderful.
All right, now we have Chris McNamara. Sorry, can't talk today.
Hi, yeah, this is Chris, and a few things that we've done differently at our work locations, whether it's center-based or group-supported. We've had screenings, health screenings at the beginning of each day, which include temperature checks and asking a few questions about who folks have been around, if they've been exposed to anybody who's had symptoms, or they themselves have been feeling any symptoms of illness. Once folks are on site, of course, we've required masks. For those who have been unable or unwilling to wear masks, we haven't been able to provide services to them. But the folks who've been attending have been very good about that. In our work areas, we've been spacing people out 6 feet per the CDC guidelines. We've also had increased the number of our lunch sessions so that folks weren't crowded in our lunch areas, and offered biweekly on-site COVID testing. And because we did have some attendance, obviously, decrease throughout the pandemic, we have had temporary workers and part-time workers that have come on and go through the same, screening process, but they're working alongside our members as well, at a socially distanced, of course. Another thing that we had to do different this year is we normally have a very lovely holiday get-together. Where all of our members gather in one place for a big celebration. We weren't able to do that, but what we did is we had mobile pizza parties. So folks would have a holiday celebration with their crews, so that everyone was still kind of in their own little smaller bubbles, and we didn't have everyone together in one area, but we still were able to have a celebration that way. But otherwise, work has continued, and folks are still working in teams together.
Great, thank you, Chris.
That's really great to hear, that keeping people together.
I just want to highlight, Danielle, before we go to the next person, that Kira submitted just in the Q&A to highlight that they've been providing the TTE, which I think is Transition to Employment Service, via looks like virtually or remotely, and certainly advocates for that to continue after the pandemic. So that's a good, another good thing that you all have been able to adapt that into a remote type of environment. So thank you, Kira, for sharing that with us.
Awesome. Looks like Carol Carr would like to speak.
Yes, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. And at Achieve here in Yuma, we had a very unique set of circumstances. We were an essential provider, so we needed to continue operations. But due to the nature of the essential services we were providing, we were already, had already implemented prior to COVID, a lot of the practices. So it was great every day what members continued to come to work would learn and continue to reinforce. And it was a great education experience for everybody. Of course, we were able to, we more or less brought the work into our campus, kept everybody in their distancing and the masking and gloves and such. That was beneficial. But I think the greatest thing that we did was community education, business education, because in spite of everything, the nature of the work we do, we can still be up and operational. And even the individuals that we're serving that we're doing employment services with would be able to go out in the community and continue to serve the customer. And I think that was a big eye opener, because when you're talking employment and integration and choice and such, being in the community and taking the opportunity during the pandemic to educate community members and businesses really went a long way. And they realized who the individuals are that were working, why they could, with or without a pandemic, consider employment of the individuals, because they already had the training and the wherewithal on what the appropriate safety measures and that were taken. It also was beneficial to be able to work with the individual members and constantly talking about, you know, the reminders of the safety. But, you know, we have to do that with all staff, not just our members. So, you know, it was a great opportunity to continue the education, the safety, to do trainings we may not have ever thought about before on germs and protection and such. So those were really good. But another part of all of this, and Dara, you mentioned it, is the isolation and the anxiety and the fear that's associated with some of that, and hearing on the media people that were dying in that. But being able to be together and talk about it did a lot for the individuals that were coming, you know, that were still maintained and stayed with us at work. We had a significant reduction, but we continued to operate. And those that stayed, everybody stayed healthy, you know, relatively low incidences of illness, and we continued to maintain. So I think that the community education is a key component of these services that we want to continue and get them more engaged and more involved.
Thank you, Carol. Great insight. Just a different perspective on how, you know, COVID can help us think about things a little bit differently in the future too, as a benefit. Despite all the deficits and the tragedy that it's brought, there are definitely bright spots that we can refer back to. Great feedback.
Yeah, I love the idea of educating the community, because it really is to their benefit. All right, we have Jody Roth-Jones. You should be able to speak now.
Hello, I am with the city of Peoria, and we had a GSE program here where we would have a food cart at our library or our community rec centers. And before spring training ended last year, we were at spring training with our food cart, where they made their own food and they were selling it. And then we did some custodial landscaping here around the city complexes. When the city closed down, that program had to close down as well, along with our DTA. We had to go virtual. So what we've been doing is at least once a week, we've been keeping them, we have them do a virtual training where they have to have their GSE shirts on. They have to kind of come dressed because we are paying them, but they attend these virtual trainings for 1 hour a week so we can help keep them on payroll so I don't lose them off of our city's payroll system. And then we're reviewing things all the time about like health and safety, job skills and things just to kind of keep everything fresh from what they've learned so they don't regress any. And then we even do some cooking stuff with them in their kitchens, and we'll watch them as they cook to kind of keep up on those skills. But that's been really well attended. Out of our 14 people in our program, 13 people have continued to do that with us. So we ended up only losing one person through this, but hopefully here by May, we'll be able to bring the group back.
Thanks, Jody. So you brought up something that made me think about too, that we've discussed internally about Did anybody, now that work is changing to remote, right? Many people, I mean, even at Access, we have the overwhelming majority of our employees are going to be forever working from home. And there's lots of companies who have made that switch. So have any of you focused on supporting members to learn skills to engage remotely and work remotely, like in a virtual environment, as a potential job skill for the future, since so many jobs now have just, companies have said, hey, we don't need to have offices. We can have people working from home. Has anybody explored that a little bit further during this time?
I definitely think for us, I mean, they're online about 7 hours a week total between our day program and our GSE program. So I think that they have definitely picked up some computer skills and have learned a lot about navigating and learned a lot about, we use WebEx, about, communicating through the computer systems. So I think it has been a good job skill that they could potentially, progress on with. And if they wanted to continue and grow their job skills, it's definitely something that they can now add to a potential resume.
Good. Danielle, do we have any other hands?
No hands right now.
Okay. Why don't we go to the next question? We can always come back to this, but let's go to, thank you for those of you who have been sharing. We really, really appreciate it. So now let's talk about, getting back to normal or better than normal. Again, considering the HCBS rules, integration, individual choice, all of those things, would you share some examples of your plans to either return to where you were pre-COVID-19 or your plans for increasing your organization's alignment with the intent of the HCBS rules, of course, after the COVID-19 risk is minimalized? So if it's consistent with what we heard yesterday, many of you are actively having these conversations about, for those of you who maybe had to really curtail your business or your support, how do we get back and utilizing this time period as an opportunity to maybe rebuild in a way that just creates more compliance with the HCBS rules than maybe you were before COVID-19. So I think we can also just kind of use this general question as a way to also talk about, what are some of the innovative things that you're doing in your employment programs that you hope to be doing one day in the future, right? That maybe you're not doing now that you'd like to share with others. And we don't look at this as bragging. We don't look at this as anything but just sharing your ideas and experiences so others can learn from it. Because by and large, it's going to likely help somebody else.
Looks like Diane Logan has her hand raised. You should be able to talk. Maybe not. Now you should be able to talk.
She might be double muted.
Okay, there we go. I unmuted.
There we go. We got you.
One of the things that we're doing, we've kind of had some folks who were a little bit resistant to wanting to make the move from a center-based employment environment to a more community-based option. They were folks who were comfortable working with their peers and doing what they had been doing. And we did close our CBE program for a period of time due to the pandemic. And as we're reopening, we're trying to work with the teams to encourage folks to open their minds a little bit more and maybe take advantage a little bit of the workforce shortage that everybody seems to be experiencing, and trying to market some of our folks going into it rather than wanting to come back to CBE so much, of trying out a combination of using our to employment or our career preparation readiness curriculums to try to transition to some individualized supported employment. We feel like, maybe other places are experiencing a workforce shortage just as we are as providers, and hoping maybe that we can get some of our members out there actually engaged in a community individualized supported employment situation, at least on a part-time basis, or if we could have a provider maybe use 2 or 3 of our members who would only maybe want to start out working a couple hours a day, but splitting a shift where they know that they would have the job coach with there that could be consistent, and provide some experience for maybe 3 or 4 members where they would normally hire one person, where the employer would normally hire one person. So we're trying to hopefully open the mind of employers right now with, everybody's had to be more creative, and there certainly is that shortage of employees right now. So we're hoping to take advantage of it.
Thanks, Diane. Really good examples of how to make those transitions in a comfortable way, but kind of pushing folks to consider a little bit more for themselves. So that's great. And to capitalize on the fact that people are having a hard time finding their workforce. It's great.
Looks like we have Karen Wilson who would like to talk. You should be able to unmute now.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yes, at Desert Survivors, we really did a few things thanks to COVID. First of all, we certainly saw our numbers drop quite significantly when COVID first hit last year. And it really kind of gave us a chance to look at the individuals that we were serving in our group supported employment program. And we really started to question exactly what our program was looking like and how we could move it more to be in alignment with the HCBS rules. So there was probably about 5 individuals who we'd been serving for some time, but really were not, in all honesty, employment material. They were not able to do any of the tasks that we were asking them to do, and were not looking like they were moving forward. So after a lot of discussions with their teams, it was decided that they would actually not return to GSE. I know that doesn't sound very positive, but it really was a good move for them, because they were really getting services that they needed versus being in a program that wasn't really able to move them further forward. In addition to that, we were looking at the folks that we were serving again, and there were a few individuals that were really ready to move on from group supported into more independent situations. And we had some individuals that were really interested in moving into more of a service situation themselves, where they could actually be providers. So we actually hired 2 of the individuals that had been with us for some time in group supported, and put them through all the necessary trainings that DDD requires. And they are actually now working as mentors for other individuals that are in the program. So we feel really positive about some of the moves that we've made, and yeah, it's looking really good. So it's really given us a chance to look at what we were doing and how we could improve and really get in alignment with the HCBS rules.
Thank you, Karen. Can you just mention something right at the end that kind of made me go, can you talk a little bit about you talked about mentoring.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is and what that looks like and who's involved?
Certainly. At Desert Survivors, we don't call our direct support staff. We call them mentors. And that's because we believe that the staff are there to be friends, guides, educators in some respects, and just be there to help the individuals that we're serving learn how to do their jobs and move forward in a very positive manner. We have a really strict rule here about respect. Everybody has to be acknowledged for who they are and respected for what they can do. And so that's why we call our staff mentors. And as I said, a couple of individuals that started out here as folks that had been referred by the state had moved forward enough and had enjoyed being mentored by the staff so much that they wanted to be mentors themselves. And so that's what we did. We helped them along the way. And as I said, they actually completed the necessary trainings, which of course the Article 9 prevention support, CPR, etc. And they're now mentoring folks themselves. They're mentoring their co-workers, which is really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Carol Carr has also raised her hand. You should be able to speak.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes,
We can.
Okay, great. You know, we decided that when we did have a significant reduction in members, when COVID first hit, we started looking at our staffing. And you mentioned earlier, Dara, about the quality of services and such. So we started to enroll our staff into special custom employment training modules, anything to do with employment that would enhance their ability to be able to do the day-to-day activities with our members and to prepare them for community integrated employment. And I found that this was really beneficial, especially for the existing clients that were there, but in moving forward for what we're trying to do with referrals to voc rehab and the whole embracing the HCBS roles in community integrated employment. And it's proven really beneficial because the staff embrace the opportunity to get additional training, and also it's enhanced their ability to be able to look at the person-centered concept, tie that into the individual planning, and then take that with what they're currently doing and how they integrate that into the community. We also looked at it as an opportunity to spend more time and learn about benefits. And we created a benefits specialist within the agency. We've looked into the DB 101. Of course, we had been doing it before, but not to the detail we did. But we also came very well versed in the ABLE Act. So we were able to get several of our individuals that were with us, and even if they weren't with us, but to educate the family members on the ABLE Act and get some of them enrolled in it so that they wouldn't compromise their Social Security while they're working. It was easier to get them into full-time employment that way whenever they return. So those were things. We also have a SOAR certified individual within our agency. So we did a lot that enhanced the staff that ultimately is going to provide a better quality services as people start to migrate back to work. We're going to keep that practice in place and make some of the trainings mandatory for individuals that come in to achieve performing services with employment.
So that's great. I mean, we've been talking a lot about, you know, what have you been doing as far as service delivery changes? And you really took a step back and said, from a staffing perspective, what can we do during this time to further prepare ourselves to, you know, sort of tackle that benefit issue, which we know is super challenging. And I think Adam, our employment administrator, he's on the line, and I think he put in the chat. So we have the Q&A part, and then I think he put in the chat some information about DB 101 for those folks who want to take the time to look at that. So I think that's really great, Carol, as far as trying to innovate in another area that we know is complicated, but also impacts people's decisions about working and to the extent that they want to work. So great feedback.
I don't see any more raised hands or anything in the Q&A. If you would like to share, please use that raise your hand feature or the Q&A chat box.
Do folks have anything that, when you think about the HCBS rules, that's particularly challenging? We know there's challenging things, and certainly implementing during a public health emergency creates another added layer. But does anybody just have some, we have a wide variety of experience of providers, both in rural and urban areas, both I think in longevity. Probably some of you are newer to this industry. Is there anything that you want to, raise a question about, or just something that you think is challenging with respect to the rules and employment services that maybe we could have a discussion about as a group? And again, it's a no judgment zone.
Oh, I see Jennifer Bear has raised your hand. You should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thank you. One of the things that really came up a lot over the past year or so was the idea that as an employment provider, we didn't have a lot of ability to continue to do what we wanted to do because of restrictions that were being put on our members by whether it was parents or group home providers. And so it became an issue that was out of our control. And I know I've talked about this in other forums, and it's just concerning from a rights perspective that you have people that may want to work, but because of the way that our systems are set up, the group homes may make a decision to withhold members from participating outside of group homes, or parents may say, hey, we're just not going to let people return to work. And so that's one of those things that it becomes hard to have individuals integrated when there are outside forces that are preventing them from participating in the first place.
Yeah, I think, and this topic actually came up in the day program discussion as well. I think, Jennifer, this is a really big challenge because partly what you're alluding to is that it's got to be a culture shift for everyone, number one, and then sometimes, and that's hard, and then sometimes there are just logistical kinds of things that create barriers for that. One of the questions that came up yesterday that I think is worth talking about in the context of this, I mean, certainly open to, interesting or innovative things others have done to try to support other team members in supporting the member to work. Certainly want to open the floor for that. As part of that question too, or discussion, want to hear about the idea or concept of the employment providers being at and being able to be active participants, being invited and being active participants in the service planning meetings, because that's obviously a place where those discussions can be addressed. So do folks have any thoughts or insight or additional challenges to talk to with respect to, those ideas of other team members, member themselves, their families, or their residential provider, and sort of creating additional barriers for employment services? It's a tough one, for sure. Has nobody experienced it, or is it just nobody has the answer?
Diane wants to contribute. Go ahead, Diane.
I think that there, on the employment side, there may be not quite as much difficulty with being invited to the ISP as you might see on the DTA side. And a big part of that, I think, is the members themselves often inform the provider of that the meeting is coming up, whereas in DTA, that's not something that a lot of those members have the cognition to be relaying back and forth. So I think it's less of an issue, and again, I think it's geographic. It's more difficult in some geographic areas than others, but I do think that it remains a bit of a challenge. And then kind of on another note, one of the challenges that I've seen is when I'm looking at, doing job coaching or in the community, there have been a number of times where I have a member get a job and be successful at a job where we have a job coach, and the member starts making more money than their job coach. And that becomes a frequent challenge, especially when I have a member working on base or on a military base or something, and then that turns into a real challenge for us. Yeah, and that's something that's been going on for a while, and it's as I'm taking folks out now trying to recruit for jobs in the community, there's a part of me that I want to tread real lightly as far as the types of jobs, because I can create an in-own staff and become my own competitor for staff hours, so to speak. So it's more of a balance than I have ever seen before, as far as a challenge. It's just more of a challenge for us as providers than I've experienced in my career.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting dilemma. Yeah. It's good on the member side, right?
Fantastic.
From the perspective of advancement, but challenge.
Yes.
But if they don't have job coaches to support them, then that creates a barrier.
Yes, it is. It makes me very, very happy for the people that we're supporting, for our members. But it's really difficult to ask my job coach to continue to go out and, yes, continue working for me and support that person in that job. Please don't go work in that job too. I don't want to lose you, it's a tough position to be in.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting.
Jody Ross Jones has raised her hand. Go ahead, Jody. You may need to unmute.
All right, so we kind of have the same situation because my staff or my my GSE participants are City of Peoria employees. They have to make minimum wage by city's standard. So they do make the 12.15 an hour. My support staff are only making like 12, maybe 30 cents, 40 cents more. So that does make it hard for us as well, because they're very much aware of that there's not much difference between the two, and obviously have a much greater responsibility. So we've been trying to work on that issue, but because they're also city staff, the job coaches have to pay retirement, which is a state thing, is 11% of their pay. So that's just something we've been struggling with lately, is trying to figure out how to get these things higher for the job coaches themselves. When it comes to ISPs, I pretty much struggle in general with getting invited. For the most part, I have maybe 5 or 6 that inform me on a regular basis out of the 30 that we have in our DTA program, and then about 15 of those do GSE on the side as well. So I do struggle a great deal, and I typically have to be the one following up and asking to get planning documents to make sure that those are staying up to date.
So Jody, can I just ask you real quick, how do you then communicate the goals and objectives that you're working on in the employment arena with the planning team? Is that just handled through mail or email, or is there just a disconnect there altogether?
There tends to be a little bit of a disconnect. We will make sure we get some goals on there, but getting them changed is where I see that, or evolving them as they get better, is where we sometimes have the disconnect. So if I start to be tracking it and I see that we've been at this goal for a while and it hasn't been changed, and I don't know when the meeting is, I'll ask for the meeting. If not, I will also just send an email to the support coordinator saying we need to update this goal at the next planning meeting, or do the change of ISP form if I think it needs to be changed as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for that insight.
There's no more raised hands, Sarah.
Okay. Well, we can certainly close early. I think that we'll kind of continue to watch the hands if folks have some final thoughts. Danielle, if you can go to the last slide, I think it's just our overview. So one of the things I want to mention is that we're going to be in partnership with our health plans and their workforce development administrators, hosting more sessions like these around some of the topics that you all have brought up today. So, and then maybe more topic specific. So we might have one just around employment program providers, in the person-centered planning process, and bring case management folks to the table to have those discussions, for example, as an example. Or maybe have a meeting with the workforce development administrators about some of the things that you're seeing around staffing shortages, and how the great, labor market for our members is an advantage, but some of the disadvantages to that with respect to retaining the staff to support them. So we'll continue these conversations. Certainly enlightening to me. I'm hoping that you all benefited from it. Very good work, creative things that you all are doing. As a final comment, I think we always want to take the opportunity to share with you that we appreciate the work that you do every day to support our members, particularly in the employment arena. We're very much focused on supporting people to address employment as a social determinant of health, and what that means to people's overall health and well-being and quality of life. So thank you for the efforts that you make every day. It doesn't go unnoticed, and it doesn't go unappreciated. Sorry, Danielle, going back to the resource slide. I got out of order, I apologize. with respect to resources, so we will provide the tools and put them up on the website. We'll send out a notice once that's occurred. We want you to stay informed with the HCBS rules as we start to perform, or the health plans start to do the quality assessments. There's going to be a lot of information that gets shared. So please make sure that you're signed up under the constant contact, which is under the Stay Informed tab on the webpage. There are recorded sessions from back in 2019 and I think early 2020, just on a general overview of the rules. The provider assessment tool, obviously that's been modified slightly, but the basics are there. And then Danielle and I did a recording of just sort of an overview of the HCBS assessments reimagined as a result of COVID. So that's also there for you, as well as these sessions, these part 4 setting specific sessions will be put on the website, and Danielle will be doing her best to get them on quickly so you can review them again or refer them to other staff if you feel that that's helpful. In regards to just policy questions or things you think about, or maybe an idea you have as a result of these settings, you can email Danielle and I at the hcbs@azaccess.gov. It just goes to the two of us. I think we're also going to think about maybe putting together some kind of, as the assessments move forward, we learn more about some of the innovative practices, sort of highlighting those and compiling those in some way to share with you. But this is really just the beginning of our engagement, and also want to mention that once the assessments get started, we'll focus our attention on developing tools for members and their families that hopefully will also be helpful to you all in some of those hard discussions around, taking risks and pushing our limits to get people to be as successful as they can to be where they're at. So thank you for today. This is great. You guys did great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your challenges and your innovations. And again, just thank you for the work that you do. And we look forward to our next conversation. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye.